U.S. economic growth was 1.7% in the last quarter, capping a strong year. The overall 2021 increase in the gross domestic product was the biggest in decades as the pandemic's effects eased, though challenges continue. Continuing to rebound from the shocks of the pandemic, the nation's economy expanded by 1.7% in the final 3 months of 2021, the Commerce Department announced Thursday. The figure, which was adjusted for inflation, reflects the growth in gross domestic product, the broadest measure of the goods and services produced. On an annualized basis, the increase for the quarter was 6.9%. For the full year, the economic expansion was 5.7%, the biggest increase since 1984, an impressive feat, though one that also reflects the depth of the damage inflicted by the coronavirus the year before. Consumer spending and private investment were quickly revived as a result of vaccination efforts, cheap credit conditions and additional rounds of federal aid to households and businesses. The labor market has recovered almost 19 million of the 22 million jobs lost near the peak of virus-induced suspensions in activity. The initial momentum provided by government stimulus and the post-vaccine resurgence in many sectors is projected to fade further, and the Federal Reserve is planning to use its policy tools in the coming months to rein in inflation. In addition, economists expect the Omicron variant to be a drag on the economy in January and much of February. But they say activity should normalize as the variant fades and spring approaches. Fiscal and monetary policy committed to supporting the economy aggressively during the pandemic, and it worked, said Julia Coronado, a former Federal Reserve economist and a professor of finance at the University of Texas at Austin. Not only did we meet the goal of shortening the recession, she said, we exceeded all expectations on the speed of re-employment. As recently as February, the Congressional Budget Office predicted that it might take until 2024 to reach the current unemployment rate of 3.9%, down from a peak of 14.7% in April 2020. The economic recovery has been overshadowed recently by the highest rates in inflation since 1982. Consumer price increases, which reached 7% in the year through December, began to intensify in the spring when demand overstrained supply networks already discombobulated by the pandemic. Import prices, for instance, were 10.4% higher in December than a year earlier, according to the Labor Department. Many businesses, large and small, are preparing for such supply chain issues to stretch beyond the summer, an unwelcome sign for workers whose wages have grown at the fastest pace in decades, while their purchasing power as consumers has been dented by costlier goods. A Gallup survey conducted this month found that Americans view the economy more negatively than positively, with only 29% saying that the economy is improving, while 67% believe it is getting worse. Still, 72% say it is a good time to find a quality job. It's all about what you prioritize, said Allison Schrager, an economist and senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, a conservative think tank. Policymakers in Washington decided to err on the side of delivering too much pandemic aid rather than too little, and Ms. Schrager is among the analysts who say the trade-offs of that decision are becoming evident. If there had been less stimulus, she said, inflation wouldn't be as bad as it is. At a news conference on Wednesday, Jerome H. Powell, the Fed chair, conceded that bottlenecks and supply constraints are limiting how quickly production can respond to higher demand in the near term, and that these problems have been larger and longer lasting than anticipated. As analysts mull the direction and degree of price increases this year, many see the spring months as a crucial pivot point, said Ellen Zentner, a managing director and the chief U.S. economist at Morgan Stanley. This is partly because the Consumer Price Index reports in March and April of this year will provide the first relatively stable year-over-year comparisons that experts will have seen in 3 years. 2020 data was juxtaposed with the pre-pandemic normal of 2019. Reports in 2021 after the economy reopened were measured against the abnormal, partly depressed environment of the vaccine-less economy in 2020. During quarterly earnings calls, J.P. Morgan Chase and Bank of America, which serve a combined 140 million households, have reported that families' finances are technically better off than before the pandemic. Bank of America said its customers spent a record $3.8 trillion in 2021, a 24% jump from 2019 levels. But analysts note that dwindling savings and continuing price increases along with any new coronavirus variants could curb consumption.